Over the last 5 years of Made in America and Simplify, we've hired over 300 people. And along the way, I have learned a ton about delegation. In the beginning, I thought delegating meant delegating a task. But what I realized through this process is the actual true goal of successfully delegating is delegating ownership of the result. It takes some steps to get there. When we start at that point where, we hire someone and we give them subpar training and onboarding, and then we say, own the result of closing 5 contracts a month. We're doomed to fail, they're doomed to fail. And so I'm just going to cover my framework and hope it's helpful for you and share a little bit of how I've learned that. What is up? What is up? Delegation is on my mind, and that is what we're going to talk about today. So over the last week, I have been knee deep in hiring, all different types of involvement in hiring. So I'll give you some context here. Over the last, we'll say 5 years of Made in America and Simplify, we've hired over 300 people. Now, I have not taken part in every single one of those hires. However, I've definitely contributed, and it did all start with, at some point, a single hire. And from there, it grew to me doing a hire, every single hire, to training other people how to get to the point where they can hire following our system, to getting to the point where now people can identify what's needed to hire, then hire for that position. So it's taken a lot of work. I've learned a ton. It's not to say I'm a master of it by any means. However, I'm a lot further now than I was 5 years ago. And along the way, I have learned a ton about delegation. And this topic really came to mind over the last week because I'm thinking about, and I'm watching more people get involved in hiring, but I'm thinking about, how do I train them? How do I teach them to delegate? Delegation is sort of a friction point for a lot of leaders, and any personnel that are involved in management, any leadership role is going to have to face delegation head on. And just to be clear here, in the beginning, I thought that delegating meant delegating a task. So when we say, oh, we're leaders, oh, we delegate, oh, whatever. And I would think, well, all it is it's taking like a thing that I'm doing and getting somebody else to do that thing. And we could oversimplify it. But what I realized through this process is the actual true goal of successfully delegating is delegating ownership of the result. However, it takes some steps to get there. That's what I'm going to talk about today. And when we think about delegating that way, it's helpful. However, when we start at that point where, we hire someone and we give them some subpar training and onboarding, and then we say, hey, own the result of closing 5 contracts a month. We're doomed to fail, they're doomed to fail, unless they have context, they have a certain experience level, which I'll talk a little bit more about today. But if you're like me, this resonates with you because you've gone through it. And so I'm just going to cover my framework and hope it's helpful for you and share a little bit of how I've learned that. So this all really started out with my very first hire, which the very first hire I made, actually thinking about it years ago, was somebody to help me mow lawns, but it was like a technician, if you will. Same thing with our cleaning company. Very first hire we had in our cleaning company was a technician. And thinking back to that, those are pretty straightforward hires because we have a thing that we're doing, in this sense, mowing lawns, and we just need help. And the fortunate thing is it's pretty common for somebody to know how to mow a lawn. So it made for a good starting point. And there were little tips and tricks I done. There's actual directions that you should mow. You got to rotate those directions. There's a structure and a process for mowing, a certain order of events that should happen that make for a good lawn. And so I had to explain some of those things. It was very minimal. I was starting in a good place. And I think that really helped set me up for success. However, when I started trying to hire and delegate tasks that were less common, so people that we're hiring didn't always have skills that were required to do it out the gate. They sort of had to build those skills. They didn't come into the company with those skills already, because these are more uncommon things, right? Like mowing a lawn, cleaning a house. Like, it's pretty common for somebody to have some sort of experience doing that. And so you're not starting from nothing. If I were to say to you, if you didn't know anything about AI, build me a GPT, there's a lot of sub skills that are involved that go into that. So unless you have some background there, I really have to start at ground zero and start building a base. And that tends to happen as our businesses grow, because the things that we're doing are more and more specific to a growing business, and they're less common unless you hire somebody that already has that context and that skill level, which is a noble goal for sure. Unless you have that, you're going to have to start at ground zero. So let's talk about the old me and how I used to think about delegating. I used to think about delegating as binary, very black and white. Hey, either you do the thing or you don't do the thing. Oh, by the way, when you do the thing, you do it exactly the way that I want it, or you don't. And then even worse, sometimes as entrepreneurs, we don't quite know what we want, even though we may think we do, or maybe sometimes we know we don't. But either way, we don't know exactly what we want. And so it's hard to determine if we're getting the result we want or not. Worse yet, if we don't know what we want, how's the person we're delegating the thing to supposed to know what we want? They don't. So this was a false belief that I had, thinking that I could just lump things together in like a bucket. I call it like the delegation soup, where if you think about a soup, it has all these little different parts. And I just very ambiguously say, hey, make the thing happen. I learned that that's not helpful. Clarity really is kindness in the sense, and the more descriptive we can be, the more clear I can be, the easier it is to delegate. All right, so there's a lot of good content out there when it comes to how do you delegate. I know John Maxwell has 6 levels of delegation. I'm not sure who else, but somebody else has there's 5 levels of delegation. I've seen 7 levels of delegation. I have 4, but needless to say, there are levels of delegation. And if you think about these in sequence, you start with 1, you go to 2, 3, 4, always, 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 even if 1 is just a check on learning. Now, the cool thing is when you get to hiring people that have context, that have prior skills, that are more advanced in the area of things that you're delegating, well then, yeah, you can get away with skipping to level 4, which, if you're like me, tends to happen. And that inconsistency is actually what causes us chaos, because we might have somebody who's better than us at certain things. And so we can be very ambiguous, very vague, and just throw them an idea of what we want. And then they can give us something better than what we want, because they have all that experience and the skill built, and they've been doing it for a while. And then we get somebody else where maybe they're not as skilled in that area, and we expect them to act the same way. We don't give them the context they need. We haven't trained them on the skills. There's probably no system involved, so they have to figure out processes and order of those processes to get it done. And then they have to try to discern what it is we want the end state to look like, because we're probably not painting a good picture of it for them anyway. And so it gets really convoluted, and this is what leads to getting so frustrated. At least for me, this is what led to getting so frustrated. So here's what I developed, here's where I'm at now, and this is how I'm training anybody that I work with that needs to delegate properly, how they should delegate. And it is 4 steps. The first is delegate the research. The second is delegate the task. The third is delegate the project, and then delegate ownership of the result. Here's what I mean by that. Oftentimes, the first step is going to be to delegate the information about the thing. So I came across this because this is a very common thing that all these frameworks start with, but I came across this as I thought about, hey, what is the first thing I do when I don't know about something? I always do research. I'm thinking about building landing pages. Before I built my first landing page, I did some research on, hey, what are the tools? How do you go about it? What's important? What are the components? There's copy, there's forms, there's the marketing colors, and there's pictures, and there's all sorts of things, right? I started learning that through the research. So this is the easiest piece to delegate. And oftentimes the process of going through this allows a person to learn. Well, also sometimes it's helpful on a new endeavor anyway. That's a piece of the puzzle that now you don't have to do. So for instance, when we were first building our podcast, that was one thing that I delegated. This was a whole new task, so it was perfect for me to start there. To my assistant, I just said, hey, can you do some research on what the main tools are that everybody's using to record podcasts? And, we'll go over them together. And so that was an easy first step. She learned something, I learned something, and it started to build confidence. Second step is to delegate the task. Now, we all know that when we're trying to accomplish a thing, we're trying to get a result, we like to bunch ideas, things that need to happen, functions, processes all together, and then call it a thing, slap a label on it. So we say, we need to close a contract. Okay, well, what does closing a contract mean? It means that you need to know how to write a contract. You need to know what a contract is and what it means. You need to know how to run a sales process. You need to know how to make an offer. You need to know, like, there's so many sub steps, and building these skills one at a time is how we get to the end state. So likewise, when we're trying to delegate, when we're trying to train, we need to break these things down. My training framework is very similar to how I delegate, but we need to break those things down. So it's just easy enough to delegate a task. And when doing so, here's what has been helpful for me is we delegate the task and then we check in at certain milestones. So front of mind for me is a landing page. My assistant sometimes will help me build landing pages. So initially it was, hey, why don't you go get copy made or write the copy for this landing page and then check in with me. So that would be a task, and she's working on the landing page. The milestone is getting the copy written, right? So she might check in with me once all the copy is written or once all the copy is uploaded. So I can give her some feedback on it. We can adjust. It helps her build confidence, and she's kind of learning what's expected while I'm also getting to view and track, is she getting it? Is she not getting it? And how she's going about it. Then there might be a second milestone. Okay, now that you've done that, get everything linked and the forms input and so on and so forth. And then check in with me, another milestone. We might have milestones all along the way for the project. The end result, what I really want her to do is build a landing page, but I've broken it down for her, checking along the way at those milestones. And that would be level 2. Now the third level would be after she's done that and she understands what she's doing. She's built that confidence in herself. She's built that confidence in me. Now I can say, hey, I need you to build this landing page. Give her all the information she needs. I'm still being descriptive. I'm not being ambiguous, but give her all the information she needs. And then once she builds that landing page, she gets the whole thing complete. Then I'll do my review and give her some feedback. Once she gets through doing that a few times, so that's going to be level 3, right? That's delegating the project, so to speak. Once she gets done with that, now the last thing is for her to own the result. And so the result for me would be, we build a lot of landing pages. We're consistently building landing pages. So for me, in that same sense, the level 4 delegation would be delegating ownership of getting these landing pages built. And so that next logical step would be getting her to that point. And so what does that look like? Well, that looks like not me completely letting go of it, but getting to the point where she tells me when it's accomplished. So I'm the one that's saying what landing pages we need, when we need them, and she's the one that's taking ownership of making sure they get done, and she's just notifying me and letting me know that they're done, and that's just a part of communication. And so that would be the 4th level. And this is what has helped me to get to the point where I go from doing a thing or things and getting other people to take ownership of the result, like why I'm doing those things, right? Why am I going out on sales appointments in my real estate company to get properties under contract? So getting to the point where I could delegate properties getting under contract, right? And somebody taking ownership of that because they know that we need to keep contracts coming in. And so that's just an example, but that is the whole idea here. And no matter how you chop it up or what the position is, I find myself following the same pattern, this same framework to get to that end state. So I hope you found that helpful. If you have, let me know. Leave me a comment, give me a like, give me a subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. We'll see ya.